Everyone, thank you for joining the Dual Anonymous Peer Review DAPR workshop. So this is in the context of the 2024 Human Exploration Research Opportunity Appendix E funding opportunity sponsored by the Human Research Program. This meeting is being recorded, and within a couple of days following this meeting, the recording, slides, and an FAQ will be posted on Inspires alongside the solicitation. During this meeting, Dr. Steve Platts, who is the Human Research Program Chief Scientist, will introduce you to DAPR requirements. In addition to information that you will hear today, I would like to remind you to carefully read this solicitation and the DAPR guidance document, which provide additional details. Posted on the solicitation Inspires page, you can also find an FAQ that I would also recommend you to check regularly. This document will be updated with new information as we receive them. So before we start with Dr. Platt's presentation, I have posted a link in the chat for you to use to ask your questions and to upvote questions of particular interest. Note that questions posted not using this link, including questions posted in the chat, will not be answered. Only questions posting using this link will be addressed after Dr. Platt's presentation. So please make sure to ask your questions using this link. Steve Platts, whenever you're ready.
All right, thanks, Guillaume. Good morning, everyone. As Guillaume said, my name is Steve Platts, and I'm the Chief Scientist of HRP. We wanted to do this workshop for dual anonymous peer review because this is relatively new for our community. We've done it through 2 full cycles now. We have data from the first cycle. We're still analyzing data from the second cycle. And one of the things we noticed is we were still getting quite a few proposals that were declined for DAPR reasons. And so there still seemed to be some confusion about how something should be done, and we wanted to have this forum to go over everything again and to give our investigators the opportunity to ask specific questions. So with all of that being said, today my talk is about the DAPR, and it has some content. Can you go back real quick, Guillaume? Sorry. Content from Douglas Hudgkins, and he is the SMD director of DAPR, and they were the first ones to take this on, this dual anonymous peer review process. And so he had some really nice slides, and he's been kind enough to allow me to use some of them. Next slide. So why do we do DAPR? Unconscious bias is part of the peer review process. It's been recognized for a very long time. It's also called inherent bias. And what it is essentially the psychological filters that we all have based on our personal experiences, culture, and stereotypes. For peer review, it really comes across as biases towards and against certain universities and institutions. Just a quick example is everyone knows Harvard, and they have a great reputation, and people know that, and it colors their thinking on things. And there are a large number of smaller universities that might not have that reputation, and they have a much more difficult time getting government funding than some of the bigger or more well-known schools. And so the point of DAPR is to try and get rid of that bias, right? We're judging the science. We're not judging where the science is being done or by whom the science is being done. All of that being said, we do have a mechanism to take the investigator and the institution into account. I'll talk about that more in a little bit. And so this inherent bias or unconscious bias is not automatically good or bad. It just is what it is because we are humans. But it does affect the peer review process. And I always tell this story. I was in a peer review panel before COVID when we used to get together in person. And the whole panel, you know, we do the pre-reviews. So if you look at the pre-review scores of this one particular proposal, all of the reviewers scored it in the 50s. It was a very low scoring proposal with one exception. One reviewer scored it a 95. And so when it came time to discuss, this reviewer stood up and said, I know this isn't a good proposal, but I know this team and I know they do good work, so I trust them. So I'm going to keep my score of a 95. Again, this is exactly what we're trying to get rid of here. And so we don't want people getting the benefit of the doubt just because they wrote a bad proposal. All right, we want to fund the best science possible, and we can only judge that by the proposals themselves, not based on the reputation of an investigator or their university or institution. Next slide, please. So as I said, we implemented this in 2023. It had been piloted by the Hubble program and a couple other groups here at NASA. They saw very positive results. So as soon as it became available for us to use, we started using it. We've finished 2 cycles now. Again, as I said, the focus here, the purpose is to direct the focus onto the science, not the team, their prior work, or the location. And here's the thing in red is really important. We strictly adhere to the DAPR philosophy. So if we tell you, you must use this format for your references, we mean it. And so if you decide to use a different format because it's well accepted in the field, your proposal will not be reviewed. So you must follow the instructions to the letter. It's like the old school NIH back in the day when they used to measure your margins with a ruler and measure your font sizes and everything. And if you violated any of that, went straight into the trash can. So all the things we're going to tell you coming up in the next hour or so about what the DAPR regulations are, please follow them to the letter. And all of this is spelled out in the solicitation. So you should have all the information you need to write a successful proposal. Next slide. So the way we do this is we have 2 parts of our new standard review of proposals. The first part is an evaluation of scientific merit, which is blinded. The second part is the validation of the proposer's expertise and resources. So when the proposers are submitting their proposals, they're given instructions on how to write it, and they submit documents. One is anonymized, one is non-anonymized. This is all spelled out in the solicitation. So the merit score that's initially given, well, no, the merit score that's given is based on the anonymized document. And so the panel does not know who wrote the proposal or where they're from. Then once the scores are given, the reviewers are unblinded and they're allowed to see the information about the investigator, their CV, all that information, where they're from. And then they are allowed to comment on the expertise and the track record and all of that. And the one thing that is clear here is that does not color the merit score. So if someone is found to be not qualified, it doesn't affect the merit score, but that notation is made and is sent on to NASA for their consideration when they're doing their secondary reviews. Next slide. So there are some commonly observed pitfalls that we wanted to bring up. One, and I sort of mentioned this already, you have to use the bracketed numbering system for references. No other format is acceptable. Definitely do not include author names, so you can understand why, right? We're trying to anonymize this. People, when they write grants, tend to cite their own work, and so if you see 20, 30 references from the same individual, you're going to know who wrote it. And so when you do the bracketed numbers, when you're doing the initial merit review, you won't know who that person is. Now, one thing that I want to mention also is that we understand that reviewers know the fields, they know the investigators, and if they really wanted to, they could probably figure out who they are. We ask them not to do that. The whole point is not to make it impossible to figure out who the people are, but it's to take the focus away from the teams and away from the investigator and back onto the science. We also don't want you to claim ownership of previous work, and this is typically worded as my previous work or our prior analyses, work from this laboratory, things like that. There are other ways to phrase it that you can still talk about the work. So you could say as previously shown, right? Because then you're not referencing yourself. Those type of things are more acceptable. Do not include any information that may reveal or be interpreted as the identity of the personnel or institution for team members. An example here would be if the investigators at Johnson Space Center, and they do everything to anonymize that part, but then in the bulk of their proposal, they say test subjects will be recruited through the Johnson Space Center test subject facility. That's a flag that tells the reviewers that this individual is at Johnson Space Center, and thus that's a violation of DAPR. So be very careful not to do things like that. Don't identify collaborators or consultants by name or institution. In the bulk, we've also had people do that. We've had some people submit full lists of their team, and that's obviously a DAPR violation. Also, do not identify yourself as a new investigator or your early career. We do want to do that, but there's a separate place for you to check those boxes. Don't include that narrative in your proposal. Next slide. So if a proposal is found to be non-compliant, investigators will be notified that it wasn't reviewed due to DAPR non-compliance. If it's a step one, we do not supply feedback for step ones. There are just way too many of them, and it's way too difficult for us to provide written feedback to people with their step one proposals. For step two, we do give limited feedback. We can point you to a compliance case or similarities or things like that. Please contact us if you believe that your proposal was rejected in error. So Lee Shar is the first line of contact here, and there's an email that's listed in the solicitation where you can send your queries. But so if there's a question, he reviews it and then he brings it up to me and I review it. So we do take it very seriously, and we have overturned some rejections. And so please, don't be afraid. I know most of our investigators are not afraid to contact us and ask us questions. So please don't be afraid to do that. We'll give you as much information as we can. And then we try and give more information in venues like this, and also at the investigators workshop that we have at the end of January. During the speed networking, we have a table for dual anonymous peer review, and that's also a great place to ask questions and maybe ask some more specific things. Because remember, while the solicitation is out, we can't make specific comments. But if it's after the fact, if the solicitation cycle has closed and awards have been made, then we're free to make more specific comments to folks if they have questions. Again, I'm going to restate that we want everyone to be successful, but we do strictly adhere to the DAPR rules. Next slide. So here's an example just for folks to to look at. So the first one is non-compliant with DAPR, and the reasons are highlighted here in yellow. The first is that they identify the laboratory that will be doing the analysis, the Nutritional Biochemistry Lab at Johnson Space Center. And then you can also see that they did not adhere to the required referencing format, and they use the last name format, which is a big no-no. If you look at the compliant version, so this was just slightly rewritten. It says, instead of saying will be performed by the Nutritional Biochemistry Lab, it'll say performed using methods previously published, and then gives references using the numeric format that's approved for DAPR use. So you can see it's a relatively minor tweak. It's not that difficult to bring something into compliance. I think one of the main reasons we see people being non-compliant is they're resubmitting grants that they've previously submitted, and they're not reading the instructions on how things have changed in the last 2 years. So please, if you have a grant that you've previously submitted and you've revised it, make sure that you go through it for all these DAPR compliance issues. Next slide. Another example, again, here in the yellow, you can see where the violation is. So this is identifying a collaborator by name and also by a challenge that they won. And then again, identifying Dr. Doe. The way that it can be written to be in compliance is to say, to just be more specific about the actual process and not who is doing the process. And just saying that you're going to be doing this with a collaborator, but don't identify that collaborator. That collaborator will be identified when the code is broken after the science merit score is given. Next slide, please. Example C. Again, in yellow, you can see the violations. Again, they're talking about in our laboratory, and they were analyzed by a specific individual. And then they identify the facility where a bed rest study was done. You can see the compliant version, focusing more on the process as opposed to the individual. And here you can identify preliminary data is being obtained via private communication. And again, you don't identify who that communication is with. And then instead of saying at the NB-HAB facility, you can just say at a bed rest facility and being more generic there. Next slide. So I talked a little bit about why we're doing it, right? Where we want to get rid of the focus on the individual, and why is that? What does this inherent bias do to our proposals? Well, what it does is it reinforces having the same investigators being funded over and over again. It decreases diversity and inclusion. And so when we've switched to the DAPR program, this is data from astrophysics. And this one is looking at different types of institutions and how successful they were in getting grant money. So the kind of purpley pink bars are pre-DAPR percentages, and the blue bars are post-DAPR percentages. You can see the different size institutions, so Research 1, Research 2, and then primarily undergrad institutions, minority serving institutions, and then non-academics. You can see that R1 and R2 don't really change that much, but there's a very large increase in the number of awards that go to smaller or undergrad institutions, and also more than doubling of the number of awards that go to minority serving institutions. And again, no effect on the number for non-academic research institutions or centers. And so if the purpose is to increase diversity and reach a new audience, you can see here that this has been successful in doing that, at least at the institutional level. Next slide. Here's data from the Hubble Go program. And what this is looking at is the number of first-time PIs. And all of the bars on the left-hand side, which is in white, are pre-DAPR, and then the light green bars are after DAPR. And you can see here the number of first-time PIs before DAPR ranges from 2.2 to 12.6%, where most of them are around 6% or so. But after DAPR, marked increase in the number of first-time PIs, triple, quadruple the number. And so this has been quite successful at getting new investigators into the funding cycle for the Hubble Go program. Next slide. This is preliminary data from our first cycle that we did in 2023. And this is also looking at what we consider new investigators or early career investigators. And you can see that before DAPR, which is 2016 to 2021, we had about a 20% success rate for these individuals. For our N of 1 granted single cycle that we used DAPR, that percentage went up to 60%, where 5 out of 8 proposals that were funded were by either first-time investigators for HRP or for early career investigators for HRP. Next slide.
This is your last slide.
Okay, great. So that's the end of the information I wanted to present. Most of this is available as part of the solicitation as they are released. We do anticipate having a new solicitation being released tomorrow. Lishar, are we still on track for that?
No, there's no new solicitation release. The step ones are going to be due on Monday. Is that right, Guillaume?
Yep, step 1 are due on Monday, August 26th.
Okay, great.
Yep.
So I see only one question on the board right now. And that question is, so proposers should not claim ownership of preliminary work. In proposals, however, there's a tendency to show some results of preliminary investigation in order to validate one's pursuit. This means such results should be demonstrated without any reference. Guillaume, do you want to talk on that?
Yep. So if you have preliminary results, by all means, please mention them in your project description in your proposal. That's very important. And that will be part of the merit review. The way you will be referencing those preliminary results is what is important for DAPR. As Dr. Platz mentioned, make sure you're not claiming ownership of your past work. Use bracket numbers instead of listing your names. Don't link your team members or yourself to any institutions. And in the reference list, which will be after the project description, here you will be able to list your authors as you will do with any other bibliographic references for a scientific article, for example. But within the project description text, do not list any authors by name. Also, I would like to add that if you need to cite exclusive access datasets or non-public software, unpublished data, or findings that have been presented in public before but are not citable. Each of these may reveal or strongly imply the investigators on the proposal. In these instances, you must use language such as obtained in private communication or from private consultation. And you can find all those guidance also in the DAPR guidelines document, which is posted alongside the solicitation. Do you want to add anything, Steve?
No, that's great, Guillaume. Thank you. Do we have any other questions?
So we do not have any other questions for now. Maybe we can just wait a few more minutes in case someone's come up with a question.
Sure.
There we go. So we just have another one. How does the proposer demonstrate that they have the capabilities to do the proposed research ambitions?
You can do that, or I can. It's up to you.
Yeah, go ahead.
So this one is relatively easy. So you use the references in bracket form, and you still submit a CV and all of those things. And after the merit score is given, the reviewers are given all of that information. And so they are allowed to comment on whether the proposers are qualified to do the work or not qualified to do the work, and they can comment on it. And all of that is given to NASA as part of the peer review. And that's how you do it. So you still submit a CV, you still submit all of that. You can still put in preliminary data. You just have to make sure you reference it properly, like Guillaume said, and you have to use the bracket references. And then once it's unblinded, after the initial score is given, then the reviewers can see who you are. They can see what your references are. And that's how you demonstrate that.
Yes, this will be part of the document called the expertise and resources that you will be uploaded in addition to your proposal in Inspires. And you can find in the solicitation what should be included in this specific document. So like Dr. Platz mentioned, this will be like your CVs, past funding work, facilities and equipment, all those kind of things. So we have another question. Are the list of references part of the one-page limit in step 1 proposals? So usually we do not count references as part of the page limit. And for step 1s, usually references should be limited, I would say. Not
yeah,
that
I was
much.
going to use that same word, pretty limited.
Okay.
Remember, the step 1 is largely for relevance. It's not so much to judge the investigator or the team. Is the topic that they're planning to address relevant to the call or relevant to one of our risks and gaps? And that's really the criteria that we're using to judge the step 1 proposals.
We'll just wait a few more minutes for any additional questions.
Sure. Don't be afraid, folks. Now is the time to ask questions. There are no silly questions. We're here to answer them. It's very difficult for us to answer specific questions outside of this venue, so this is your best opportunity.
Okay, one more question. I was told this question will be better addressed in DAPR. Is gene profiling an accepted means to diagnose presence of DCS or venous thrombosis during the flight mission?
This is not a DAPR question. That's a science question. There are very specific requirements for doing gene analysis for NASA, which you can find online. And our purpose here today is not to answer science questions. We don't have the experts who are directly responsible for this available right here, so we can't answer that question. All right, well, seeing no other questions, I think we'll call it a day. So thank you all very much for attending. I hope we were able to answer your questions and get you more comfortable with the DAPR process. Again, please make sure you read all the instructions when you're writing your proposals, and good luck with your proposals. So thank you.
And before we adjourn, I just would like to add, this meeting, as I said, has been recorded. The recording slides and an FAQ will be posted on Inspires within the next couple of days. And again, please also make sure to carefully read the solicitation and all supporting documents posted in Inspires, and make sure to regularly check the general FAQ, which will be updated as we receive new questions. So again, we look forward to your proposal and wish you a successful submission. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you all. Thanks, Guillaume.